There is a stretch of ocean east of Japan where the seafloor drops away into some of the greatest depths on Earth, where submarine volcanoes erupt without warning along the margins of colliding tectonic plates, where the weather can turn from clear to lethal within the span of an afternoon, and where ships and aircraft have disappeared with a regularity that drew official attention from the Japanese government and earned the sea its name, Ma no Umi, the Sea of the Devil. It sits in the Philippine Sea, in a region bounded roughly by Japan to the north, the Mariana Islands to the east, and the Philippines to the south. A vast expanse of the Western Pacific that was, in the post-war years of the early 1950s, one of the busiest and most dangerous patches of ocean in the world. The devastation of the Pacific War had left the region strewn with debris, navigational hazards, and the institutional chaos of a maritime infrastructure still rebuilding itself from catastrophe. Ships moved through these waters carrying essential cargo across routes that had only recently been cleared of mines. And in the years between 1952 and 1954, ships stopped arriving. The disappearances were documented. They were investigated. They were alarming enough that the Japanese government dispatched a research vessel specifically to determine what was happening in those waters. A scientific mission tasked with establishing whether the losses were within the bounds of statistical expectation or represented something that required explanation. The research vessel was called Kaio Maru No. 5. It did not return. The Kaio Maru No. 5 disappeared on September 24, 1952, with all 31 crew members aboard. The vessel had been specifically sent to investigate the disappearances of other ships in the region. Its own disappearance in the same waters, on the same mission, deepened the mystery it had been tasked with solving in a way that made the subsequent silence of the Japanese maritime authorities entirely understandable. There was nothing useful to say. The region where the Kaio Maru No. 5 was operating when it vanished is geologically remarkable. The Izu-Bonin-Mariana Arc is one of the most volcanically active chains in the world. A succession of submarine volcanoes, seamounts, and volcanic islands arrange along the boundary where the Pacific Plate subducts beneath the Philippine Sea Plate. The forces involved are enormous. The topography they produce is extreme, both in the depth of the trenches they create and in the violence of the volcanic and seismic activity along their margins. Among the features of this arc is Myojin-sho, a submarine volcano whose summit approaches the surface in the region where the Kaio Maru No. 5 was operating. In September 1952, Myojin-sho was in a period of active eruption. A submarine volcanic explosion at this site could produce effects at the surface without any prior visible warning. Sudden waves, underwater shock waves, the eruption of superheated water and gas that could overwhelm a vessel of any size in seconds, leaving no time for a distress signal and no debris pattern that would clearly identify what had occurred. Japanese maritime investigators examining the circumstances of the Kaio Maru No. 5's disappearance in the context of the active volcanic activity at Myojin-sho concluded that this was the most probable cause of the vessel's loss. The conclusion was reasonable. It was supported by the timing, the geography, and the known behavior of submarine volcanic eruptions. It did not explain the other ships. The losses attributed to the Devil's Sea between 1950 and 1954 numbered at least 5 vessels, with some researchers citing higher figures, depending on how the geographic boundaries of the zone are drawn and which disappearances are included in the count. The Kaio Maru No. 5 was the most significant because of its specific investigative mission and the completeness of its disappearance, but it was not the only one. In this respect, the Devil's Sea drew comparison, which was inevitable and which has never been entirely resolved, to the Bermuda Triangle, the region of the North Atlantic that had acquired a similar reputation for unexplained losses during approximately the same period. The parallel was noticed by writers in both Japan and the West, and the two zones were sometimes described as symmetrically located on opposite sides of the Earth along the same latitude band, a geographic coincidence that attracted more significance than it perhaps warranted. The Bermuda Triangle comparison is useful for one purpose. It illustrates the methodological challenges involved in evaluating claims about anomalous maritime loss rates in any region. When investigators have applied rigorous statistical analysis to Bermuda Triangle disappearances, accounting for the volume of traffic in the region, the meteorological conditions, the quality of historical record-keeping, and the probability of loss given those factors, they have found no statistically significant excess of disappearances compared to what would be expected by chance. The perception of anomaly was generated largely by selective counting. Losses were attributed to the triangle when they occurred near it, while comparable losses in other regions were not similarly aggregated and named. The same analysis has not been applied to the Devil's Sea with the same rigor, partly because the historical data for Pacific maritime traffic in the early 1950s is less comprehensive than Atlantic records, and partly because the question drew less sustained academic attention. What can be said is that the region's physical characteristics, the submarine volcanic activity, the extreme weather variability, the depth and complexity of the seafloor topography, the convergence of multiple tectonic plate boundaries, create objectively hazardous conditions for navigation. The Devil's Sea is genuinely more dangerous than average open ocean. Whether it is more dangerous than its combination of hazards would predict, or whether the perception of mystery exceeds the statistical reality, remains an open question. The Kaio Maru No. 5 was eventually located on the seafloor near Myojin-sho by subsequent Japanese surveys. The wreck's position and condition were consistent with the submarine volcanic explosion hypothesis. The families of the 31 crew members received this conclusion as an answer of sorts, a probable cause, arrived at by inference rather than direct evidence, in the absence of survivors. It was the closest thing to an explanation the sea provided. In the years following the early 1950s losses, the frequency of unexplained disappearances in the region declined. Improved navigation technology, better weather forecasting, satellite communication systems, and the general improvement of maritime safety standards across the Pacific all contributed to making the Devil's Sea less deadly in practice, even if its underlying physical dangers remain unchanged. The name persisted. Mono-umi appears on some Japanese navigational references from the period. It entered the Western literature of mysterious places through the work of researchers who were drawn to the structural parallel with the Bermuda Triangle, and it has remained there, a zone on the map that carries the residue of genuine danger and genuine loss, amplified by the human tendency to find patterns in tragedy and give those patterns names. Whether the Devil's Sea was ever truly anomalous, or whether it was simply a dangerous stretch of ocean that was crossed by too many ships in the years when the Pacific was still recovering from war, is a question that the available data cannot definitively resolve. What is not a question is the Kaio Maru No. 5. 31 people, a scientific mission, the same waters they were sent to investigate. The sea gave no answer to the ship sent to find one. It rarely does. The submarine volcano at Myojin-sho has continued to erupt periodically in the decades since 1952. The water above it looks like any other water. It has no obligation to warn the ships that cross it what lies below.